Hey everyone, my name's Kayden. I'm the editor-in-chief over the BSC newspaper, the Mystician, and this is Marvin Baker. He was the 1985 to 86 editor-in-chief. So thank you for coming today and joining us. You got in contact with me last month that you came to the Career Academy, and it's been, 38 years since you've been on campus? How was that coming back and just seeing everything?
It was a shock. I mean, some of the buildings I recognized, but a lot I didn't.
Sure.
So it's changed an awful lot since 1986.
Wow. And you guys weren't in this building doing the newspaper, correct? You were in...
No, we
building?
were in the basement of the student union.
Okay. Wow.
Yes.
How big was your team of...
There was, oh golly, that's a long time ago, Katie. I'm not sure I can remember that. I'm going to say probably a dozen or more, dozen or 15 maybe.
Okay, so pretty decent sized team. That's about what we have here now.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
We had news people, we had sports people, we had a guy that just did a weekly column, we had photographers. So yeah, it was, I think it was, yeah, that'll be close. That's a ballpark number.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome to have that big of a team. So just for everybody that's listening in, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you come from? Where were you born? And then what brought you to BSC and then further on past higher learning?
Well, I was born in Linton at the hospital back when babies were still born in small hospitals, and grew up in Hazleton. And I didn't go to college right out of high school. I drifted a few years, worked some jobs to, make some money and that kind of thing. But I came here because the National Guard had incentives to go to college. And so I started checking colleges out. Like I went here, I went to Valley City, I went to Mayville, and this was the best fit. And so I did some further checking and got enrolled and came here and then finished my journalism degree at the University of North Dakota.
Wow. Yeah. So you said that you came here, you chose BJC at the time.
I did.
What made you choose BJC? What was it here that wasn't in the other colleges?
Well, it was close to home, and when you're in your early 20s, it helps to be close to home. You got that support, family support kind of thing. I liked Mayville because I was actually on the baseball team too.
Okay.
And I would have been able to play at Mayville, but one of the prerequisites there is you need to learn how to swim, and I didn't know how to swim. So that wasn't going to work.
Right.
And Valley City was a 4-year, and I really, even before I came here, I was thinking UND to get the degree. Because I knew in high school I was going to be a journalist. I mean, I just knew it because I did articles, just freelance articles from time to time, and did some things for the Emmons County Record when I was in high school.
Okay.
And so I kind of knew then. So it was going to be UND in the end. It was just, would it be BJC or Mayville? And yeah, this was a better fit.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, for me at least, I live in Bismarck, so Bismarck State College was just the right fit.
Oh yeah.
So I understand being close to family and
Yep.
having that support. That's really good. Was there an event, or you said that in high school you just knew you were going to be a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
You just knew that was what was going to happen. What led up to writing those freelance columns and stuff like that? What led up to that, to decide on that? Was there an event, person in your life, someone
No.
you looked up to, it just happened like that?
Nope. It was just, I excelled in English in high school. And that's how I came to that conclusion, because I'm terrible at math. I can't hardly balance my own checkbook. But yet I can write pretty well. In fact, I can write in English and in French. And so
Wow.
I thought, okay, that's the path, because it might be easier for me to work on a journalism degree than it would be to work on something like, accounting or something.
Right.
So that's why I chose the path, because my people in high school came to me to help them with their English, and so that was kind of a clue.
Okay. Was it bigger back then, whenever with newspapers and stuff like that? Because someone who is good at writing, why not choose to be an author or something else that pertains to writing and stuff?
Well, an author is a completely different animal. That's a lot different. And we can get into that later if you wish, because I have written some books.
Okay.
But newspaper is, we talked about this a little bit before your camera went on. You're talking about you want the ideal length of an article. Well, that's something I knew back in high school. That's something the editor in Linton taught me. His name was Cecil Jarris, is that the shorter and more concise it is, the more people are going to read it. Mm-hmm. Or more people are going to read it. And so I even tried back then to form short, concise articles that would work in a newspaper. Whereas if you're thinking about a book, there's a lot to write, and there's a lot of tangents that you have to follow.
Right.
And come back to things. So it's a lot more complicated.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that aspect of it.
Excuse me.
What books did you write? I didn't know that.
Right. There's actually 4 of them over the past 23 years. The first one came out in 2001. It was a book about the last World War I veteran in North Dakota. It's called Dakota Doughboy, the Otto Ehringer story.
Okay.
That one did pretty well. One of my friends and I, we collaborated to put that book together. In other words, he financed it and I wrote it, because he had some money I did not, and I could write and he couldn't. So we worked together and we came up with Dakota Doughboy.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That's
and then
really
in 2018, I want to say 2018, I wrote this one called Against the Grain, and it's an ebook. It's like digital, mm-hmm. but it was never published.
Okay.
I mean, never published, physically published.
Sure.
Called Against the Grain, and it's about the local foods movement on the northern Great Plains.
Okay.
To include North and South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa. And then in 2019, I put one together called The Angle Experiment. That's free online. It's real short. Okay. So I just thought, I'm not even going to put a fee on it. People can just read it. And it's about radio and TV waves traveling beyond the line of sight, which they do.
Yeah.
Science will argue with you, but it works.
Wow, that's awesome that you wrote 4 books.
Yeah, and the 4th one came out February of 2022.
Okay.
Called The Crypt of Horror.
Is that a scary book?
Creepy, yeah. It's fiction, and it's about a young journalist who finds a clue, a murder. He discovers a clue that leads to solving a murder.
Oh,
like
wow.
a 30-year-old cold case.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, and it's called Crypt of Horror.
Wow, that sounds really awesome. So whenever you came to BJC, what brought you to being the editor-in-chief, and how did that work out? Did you do some journalist stuff before that for the newspaper, and then you came to be the editor-in-chief?
No, just what I told you about the Emmons County Record, and there was I did some stuff with the Ashley Tribune as well, but not here. When I came on campus, I wanted to work for the Mystician because hey, if I can make $10 writing an article, that's going to help, because in college, you know very well, you're living on borrowed money, right? So any little bit helps.
Right.
So I went down to the Mystician to see if I could become a reporter.
Okay.
And I met Jordis Conrad, who was the advisor at the time. And she said they had openings for editorial positions. And how about sports editor? Yeah, right on. So I took it. I accepted it right there on the spot.
Awesome.
And so when I started here, I was a sports editor. And then the following year became editor-in-chief.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had a sports editor. How many editors did you have? And then you had the editor-in-chief. So did you just have a sports editor and then the editor-in-chief were the only two?
Yep.
Okay. That's, yeah.
And Debbie Keene was the editor at the time, the year
Okay.
before I was doing it.
Awesome. So what would you say was something, would you say this job was beneficial to leading up going into UND and being the editor over there? Would you
Yes.
say that it was a
Yes.
good experience?
And just for the record, I was managing editor at UND. I never made editor-in-chief, but I was a managing editor.
Yep.
In fact, my boss, Nancy Amdahl, she was a lieutenant governor's daughter. And she was a great editor, by the way, so I have no, I mean, it worked out really well. But to answer your question, had I gone to UND to do this initially, it would have been like being in a tank of sharks, because it's a lot faster paced in Grand Forks than it is here, or than it was here. So I looked at it like, I need to learn this gradually, because if I just can't go up to UND, and I'm not that good. You almost have to have some kind of experience when you start there. And here it was a little easier that way, so yeah.
Okay, so they were very beneficial for you to be able
Absolutely.
to move forward. And what exactly did you do after UND? Because you kept writing.
I did.
So what kind of jobs did you do? Where did you work at?
Well, right out of college, I started with the Emmons County Record, my hometown newspaper.
Okay.
And there was an option there. I could have been a sports clerk at the Grand Forks Herald, or I could have had a full-time job at the paper in Linton. Well, being a sports clerk at the Herald, yeah, you're at a daily newspaper, but you're only going to make a fraction of the income, and Linton was a full-time job, so I took it.
Awesome.
And I worked there for a while, and then became sports editor at the Foster County Independent in Carrington. And then after that, let's see, the timeline would have been early 90s. So after that, I worked at a newspaper in South Dakota called the Winter Advocate. I was managing editor there, but I did not like it there. So moved back to North Dakota as soon as I found something, and that was the Mandan News. So I worked at the Mandan News for a while.
So you like it here in North Dakota?
Yeah, except for the wind.
The wind can be, it
Yeah.
can bite. It can definitely bite. So I guess my next question would be, how was it creating a newspaper in 1985 compared to, I mean, you saw the progression leading up to now. So what were the differences you saw and the changes, good or bad, in the newspaper?
Can you rephrase the question?
So whenever you're creating the newspaper in 1985, you obviously didn't send it to get the layout being done on the computer. You didn't do it on the computer. You did it in-house. How was that, seeing the progression of newspapers gradually become what they are now, where we can design the layout and put the stories on the computer and then send it to a printing house to get it printed? What were the differences and changes you saw?
Time consumption. the layouts took a lot of time and took a lot of people and a lot of effort. There was no email at the time either, so I mean there may have been, but we weren't using it. So that was another thing where you physically had to take it, and I think it was United Printing is where we went to have it printed at the time. So one of us physically had to take it down there to them so they could.
Sure, wasn't sending it in a PDF version.
No such thing as a PDF at the time.
Or in a package and stuff like that.
Right.
Okay.
So layout was done, like you said, in-house, and strips of paper. Photographs were done in a dark room, and you'd mock them up on the page.
Okay.
And then you'd put the tape around it so you'd have a border. I did not like doing that, because how do you get the 45-degree angle on a half point border,
Right. And you did a lot of photos. I saw even the homecoming week there was a ton of photos on that page. So was that why there was less photos in the newspaper, or was it just because people like more text-heavy things?
No, photography was quite different, and that's a big change, because back then everything had to be done in the dark room, and fortunately I didn't have to do that here, but others did, and it took them a lot of time. Like you look at that homecoming thing, there was 12 pictures on that page.
Yep.
So 12 photographs. You got to develop each one individually.
It's not copy and pasting it into the
Right. And just to take that a step further, when I was working, I spent 4 years at the newspaper in Langdon, and while there, I was editor and publisher was my title. And part of my job, there was a car dealership, and they ran a full-page ad every week. And the sales manager, she would go out and take the pictures of the cars they wanted to put on sale, and I had to develop those in the darkroom. 50 cars every week.
Wow.
50 pictures this size that would go in a full-page ad in a newspaper.
How long did that take?
I don't remember exactly, but I'm going to say 2 or 3 hours.
Wow.
Just for that. And then Langdon has always had good sports teams, and so there's a lot of sports photographs. And so those had to be developed. And then, of course, you got the weekly news that happens. And, I mean, it took a lot of time. And I probably spent as much time in the darkroom as I did in the office.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so when you factor in pagination and digital cameras, it just makes it so much easier.
Just put the SD card in, snap a few photos, and upload to the computer. It's a lot easier.
Yeah, because even like talking about that, if you go to an event and you take photographs, you don't know what you got until you get in a dark room.
Sure.
Did I get good photos? Did I botch it? Are they blurry? I mean, is there something I'm going to be able to use? I mean, that was kind of a stress thing back then. Like, how do I know I got a good photograph?
Right.
And so that kind of became my mentality was kind of like playing hockey. I mean, you just got to keep taking shots on goal until you get one right. So just like photographs, you take as many as you can because something's got to come out right.
Right.
And generally it did, but it was with digital, it's a lot easier because you can actually look at your photo right as you know, and it's just so much easier and more time efficient.
Right. Yeah, I can definitely see that, how that would be stressful to be able to go to an event, hope that the photos that you did want to get of the action or whatever it was, and then not knowing if it came out right until you spend 2 to 3 hours working on getting all put together.
Yeah, so. and Friday night football was probably the hardest because most of those games were in the dark, and so you're adjusting the camera to compensate for the loss of light.
Yes.
Because artificial lights, as you know, aren't even close to sunlight.
No.
So that was a thing for a while until I discovered 1600 millimeter film, and that kind of was a game changer for a while.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Was it? I'm guessing it would be difficult to have to take the photos on the football field whenever it's so big, too. So how did that come into play? Moving the camera around and getting photos.
It moved around a lot.
So a lot of
and quickly.
work. Sure.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. How did you balance work and school with being the editor, sports editor, and then the editor-in-chief, and then you had schoolwork, of course? How did that work for you?
Are you sure you want to ask that question? It didn't work out very well. And I'm going to be honest with you, Kayden. My grades weren't the best, okay? I like to think I'm fairly intelligent, but my grades were not the best here. And I think it's because, and I thought about this on the way here, fearing that you would ask that question. So, especially in '86, because I had editor-in-chief, I had a full course load, and I was playing on the baseball team.
Right.
So my grades suffered
Sure.
because I diluted my time with that other stuff. And so, I mean, I passed everything. I mean, I was good to go, and UND accepted my transcript and all, but my grades could have been a lot better.
Right. So, since you did have to balance work and school and you did do sports too, do you think that it was worth it to spend that time on the Mystician for future years since that experience did? Do you think it balanced it out almost? I mean, of course you would have wanted better grades, but...
Yeah, and I hope Jordis Conrad is watching this or will watch it, because I took the Mystician very seriously, more so than my grades, because to me that was the beginning of a career.
Right.
And I wanted to do everything right, and I wanted to make sure everything was correct. And I am human, I make mistakes, but I worked very hard to make that paper what it was at the time, and my grades were second priority. And I know professors aren't going to like to hear that, but I did pass. I worked hard enough to pass, yeah.
That's good. That's awesome. And we can tell just by your work that you definitely did know what you were doing and you did do your best in all of it. It was very interesting to look back in all the newspaper articles you did and all the columns and stuff like that, just to be able to see, to me, the changes, how different it was to look back on it. That was
Did you see the one about the biology professor?
I didn't.
Like, it was the first or second edition that I was here. I interviewed a biology professor who was working on a biological warfare against grasshoppers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he would find diseased grasshoppers and use the diseased grasshoppers against healthy grasshoppers.
Wow.
You know, because they decimate grain. I mean, they eat wheat, they eat barley and stuff. So he was working on that, and I was able to kind of get on the ground floor of that interview with his research, and so it was really cool.
Yeah, you definitely get those cool experiences being able to be a journalist and get to know things that everybody else might never know or not get the little things in them.
Right, and I wasn't even part of biology. I had no interest in biology, but yet that was pretty intriguing.
Wow, that's awesome to be part of that. That's really neat. So, I mean, you were the managing editor over in UND, you're the sports editor here, you're the editor-in-chief, and all your future jobs you had. What were the struggles you faced as being the editor and being over a group of people writing stories?
Here in Bismarck?
Yes.
Number one, I didn't know most of the people, and had only met them when they walked through the door for the first time.
Sure.
So that was a bit intimidating in the beginning, because I just seem to work better with people I know. So that was a little bit dicey there for a while. But then another thing that I was taught early in the National Guard was leadership, and you just have to lead by example, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm a knucklehead, then everybody else is going to be a knucklehead.
Right.
So I tried to be a professional leader.
Have that energy so then everybody else is wanting to do it, you know?
Yeah, because how do you motivate people?
You have to be motivated yourself.
You have to be motivated yourself,
Right.
or else you're going to be turning out $100 bills to people. That's the other way to motivate people. So, yeah, you got to lead by example.
Right, and I've definitely learned that being here, and even before that, I was doing different leadership things, being in a civil air patrol. I was the deputy commander over 20, 30 cadets, and so that was definitely an experience I got to have to learn those leadership skills before I came here.
Yes.
So another smaller military-like example, but definitely not to what a military really is.
No, but same structure.
Yes,
And so,
very
yeah,
much.
so that's great. I'm glad
Chain of
you
command and
glad you
everything.
shared that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed doing that. Saying that both my parents were in the Army, and pretty much every family I have was in the military. So, which you were in the military, and you were able to be a journalist in the military. Could you tell us a bit about that? You told me beforehand, but
Right, that was part of it. I mean, I spent 35 years in the North Dakota National Guard, so over that course of that career, there were several military occupations I had, and being military journalist was one of them. And I spent 7 years in that capacity. Basically started out at Fort Riley, Kansas. And in 2003, we got mobilized thinking we were going to go to Iraq. We never left the United States. We stayed at Fort Riley. And we worked on, well, the Fort Riley Post, which is the newspaper at Fort Riley. And then just when we got back to North Dakota, we just kept that going in our monthly training sessions. Just work on the National Guard had a newspaper called the Straight Arrow that
Okay.
we did articles and photos for.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That was definitely probably an experience for you and your career and
Yep.
everything. So obviously in 1985 to 86 and then to 87 you were here, correct? 86, 87 year? Or
No.
were you just here to 86?
85, 86. I graduated May of 86.
Okay. So in those years, compared to what you see now, or even as you were on your journey being a journalist, you saw probably a lot of trends come in and leave throughout writing and different things. Like a lot now is mental health, and sports, of course, are always here and stuff like that. But what were some of the trends that you saw in writing that came in and out? Did you see any that you can remember?
The only one that I can think of at the top of my head is how writing itself has changed. We were, you know what the AP style book is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we were hell bent on the AP style book. I mean, if we didn't know in our head, we're going into the style book and looking it up.
Right.
And I think over time that's kind of changed. I think English has become a little looser than it was.
Yes, definitely.
Because one example is the word through. How do you spell the word through?
Right. THROU.
GH.
Right.
You will see it, and because I'm telling you this, you're gonna notice this now. There's a lot of places where you'll see through spelled THRU. That's not proper English.
Yes.
That's an example.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So even just reading your previous writing, I saw a lot of even different styles in what I guess we look at. For instance, in the newspaper, you allowed a lot more, you didn't have justified text, which isn't required, but it's a lot more seen now than it was. And then widows and orphans with the typing down at the bottom, having one down at the bottom, or the line going up. So a lot of differences in that. I don't know if that was just came or introduced more now or something, but a lot of things have changed even from what I saw, even ads. There was a lot more ads in the newspaper you wrote compared to more recent years in this year that we've had a lot less businesses want an ad in the newspaper, or at least the college newspaper.
Well, communication has become so fragmented. I mean, how many radio stations are in Bismarck? There must be 20.
Yes.
And how many TV stations? There must be 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
Well, back then there was this in the Bismarck Tribune, and there was KX and KFYR TV, and there were probably about half a dozen radio stations.
Sure. So it's grown a lot.
So that advertising pie gets sliced a lot thinner now than it used to.
That makes sense.
And that's probably why you don't have as much advertising as you used to.
Mm-hmm.
Either that, or you got to light a fire under your ad people, under their butts to get them to go.
Right.
No, I'm kidding. I'm just being silly there, but it's just because the media has become so fragmented since then.
Right.
And that's the same with weekly papers. It's the same with dailies, like we talked about with your advisor before we started this interview.
Mm-hmm.
It's just changed.
It has. And I've looked through countless years of the Mystician and just the differences that took place, because that's where I get a lot of, you see how it was and how each editor did it differently, but you also see the progression of different trends, and you see the progression of how much a burger costs, you know? You see,
Oh, yeah.
I think it was 99 cents in the newspaper last I saw, and I'm like, that is not the case now to get a burger. And Big Boy was still in the newspaper, which I thought that was pretty neat.
Yep.
But just the difference for me was very intriguing to look at. Just as an editor myself, seeing everybody do it differently, and especially now in the more recent years, they've progressed to more magazine style even. Some were even more magazine look with a lot of color and illustrations that kind of popped out, had that more magazine type too.
Yep.
And I saw that a lot more recently. And what is your take on that? Do you like the more magazine look coming into the newspaper?
I do like it. And you have to remember, when I was your age, color was very expensive. So there were a lot of times we didn't even do color on the front page because it was too expensive. Well, that's become more commonplace and probably cheaper now than it used to be.
Right.
And so that, I think that's part of that reason for that change.
Sure.
Because color is now affordable where it wasn't. And I'm not sure about the tabloid format, though. I mean, the Mystician always was a tabloid, but I mean like some of these weekly papers that have switched over from broadsheet to tabloid.
Right.
I'm not sure I like that.
Yeah, I have noticed even different Mysticians had different sizes throughout the years. I like the tabloid size. I think it's very nice and clean looking. It's easy to hold.
Right.
But definitely the changes, it's, a lot of my team have looked through the different Mysticians and just how it changes, and it's really neat to see that. It's really neat. Do you have any advice for me as an editor, coming from your years of experience to me having this be my 2 months of experience being an editor?
Okay, so how much time have you got?
Well,
advice for you. I can tell just by how much time we've been sitting here, 15, 20 minutes? I can tell you have the tools to make this happen. So you got that going for you right from the get-go. Be yourself. Lead by example. You're human. You're going to make mistakes.
Right.
Don't dwell on them. You make a mistake, oops. Adjust fire and move on, you know?
There you go.
And sometimes decisions aren't going to be easy, and you got to. I would assume that some of the people who work with you are friends of yours. Mm-hmm. Well, there's going to be times where you're going to have some blunt conversations with your friends, because your job is this.
Right.
And so you have to make sure that takes precedence.
Right. That's good. For sure.
And then, you know, we could go into stuff about getting to work on time and all this, and, you know, but that should suffice, right?
Yes, definitely.
All right.
So, since it's been such a big change from people reading the newspaper so often to now, it's definitely dwindled down to a very much smaller group of people who read the newspaper, even the Tribune and stuff like that. What's your take on how important it is for people to still read it? Do you think it is still important for people to read the newspaper, or do you like the movement more towards, well, the news and stuff like that, and then things being posted on different social media places?
A newspaper is important. So I told you earlier that I spent 4 years as editor and publisher of the Cavalier County Republican in Langdon.
Yes.
That newspaper doesn't exist anymore. So there was a town of 2,500 people that lost their newspaper. And I told you that Langdon has always had good sports teams.
Right.
Volleyball, girls basketball, they've had some success in high school football. Okay, those are important things for a small town. Mm-hmm. There's no longer pictures of the girls on the volleyball team in the paper. There's no more football. You know, somebody passes away, where do the obituaries go? Who gets legal notices? Because that's Langdon is Cavalier County seat. So the county seat lost its paper, so that was the only newspaper in Cavalier County. So where does who gets the legal notices?
Right.
You know, courts, bankruptcies, divorces, all that stuff. Those all have to be published legally. Mm-hmm. Grand Forks Herald, Cavalier Chronicle. I mean, where do they go? So to me, that's the biggest travesty of losing a newspaper, is that you lose that history.
Right.
And history is so important. I mean, because, well, you look back. You looked at the history yourself. You see it right here.
Right.
What if it didn't exist? You know, it's probably not a game changer, but we'd be having a different conversation.
Exactly. And I know so many people. My great-grandma she was actually a journalist. She wrote in the newspaper down in Cleburne, Texas. She has countless articles that she has saved in scrapbooks, and she has saved that she wrote, or things happening in the town that she wants to remember, and photos, and all those things were so nostalgic to look back on. It was something that you could hold in a book, and you can look back on all the articles and see the history. But now you see more of a turn towards, oh, let's go look at the articles online. Let's do our research that way, where there's countless from all over the world, whereas your town stuff is almost lost in a sense.
It's
no
lost.
longer, you're not able to just hold it in your hand and have that.
It is lost. Because how many times is the Grand Forks Herald going to go to Langdon and do articles?
Right.
Seldom, because they have Grand Forks, they have East Grand, they have Candu, they have Grafton. So once in a great while that's going to happen, but it's not going to happen every week. And so
Right.
that stuff is lost.
It's just if it's told in memories kind of thing with people passing it down. But even then,
Yeah.
it gets lost through there. It's no longer...
Or changed. And just to answer your question further, like with social media, to me, it's like radio. It's here and it's gone.
Right. Yep. You can't really hold on to it.
You know, so if let's say we took a selfie or something and put it on Facebook, it's gone tomorrow.
Yeah. You're not really going to
Whereas
look
if
back
we
on
did that for the newspaper, it'd be here indefinitely.
Right.
Become a piece of history, like everything else that's printed every week or every month in
Archives are
yeah.
always kept in libraries, and
I
I love it.
And Kayden, I don't have a problem with digital media. Like if you can trust it, like if you know things are going to go into a digital library.
Right.
Because what happens 50 years from now when you're researching something that you did in college, that you vaguely remember, but you want to go find it? Like I told you about that first article I wrote about the football team. I remember that article, but very vaguely. So I went back into my old papers and read it. So I would have a more clear understanding of what I actually wrote that time.
Yes. And that's something that has been really interesting for us because we keep digital copies of the newspaper as well. So not only are we able to see the digital copies of exactly what was happening, but future students that want to look back or people trying to do some research can go exactly to what was written, to the stories happening at that time. And that I find is helpful for those looking back on things because they're not going to necessarily have all the copies, but to have the digital version of exactly what it was, I find is very helpful.
It is.
And I mean, I know that Karen told you about how we have the 85 to 86 issue in our archives online, and that's helpful to be able to see that. But something about having that newspaper in your hand and being able to flip through it is probably one of the most... I love doing it. It makes me happy to flip through a newspaper and read the different articles. That makes me happy.
Yeah, and don't forget, you know, you're a reporter. I mean, you're an editor. You got to smell the ink, right?
Of it.
There's nothing like the smell of ink.
Right, or how the room fills whenever we get all of the newspapers coming in from the print. It's amazing. You just see it all bundled up, tied with string, and I love it.
Yeah, you're responsible for it. You know, it's really cool. You're responsible. You did that.
It's something you did.
Yeah.
Yep, you feel accomplished from it because you got something done, right?
Now, isn't that better than acing a test in a class? I mean,
I think both are nice, but I like seeing the physical copy. The test will be gone within an hour. Once it's done, it's done. But I really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it has to be. I mean, I wouldn't have spent as many years as I did and liked it all those years if I didn't have fun doing it.
Right.
And granted, Kayden, there's times it's going to be challenging, but that's the exception, not the rule.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do have a funny question for you.
A what?
A funny question.
Funny?
Yeah, it's serious, but maybe you'll get a kick out of it. What is your stance on pineapple on pizza?
Pineapple on pizza?
Yes.
What's the matter with it?
So you're for it? You
Well,
like
yeah.
pineapple on pizza?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Maybe
That's
not the Canadian bacon, but the pineapple, yeah. Absolutely.
That's a pretty big discussion right there. There's a lot of controversy on that topic.
Really?
Yes, there is. It's going to be in the next newspaper. We have staff opinion on it. We're
Oh
each
my
the
gosh,
staff
well.
members.
Pineapple's good on pizza.
You think so?
I do.
I've never tried it, so.
Well, you need to try it, Kayden, then you'd know.
I know I need to. It just hasn't happened yet.
There's only one way to find out.
Exactly. And I can't really have an opinion off of it unless I try it.
That's right.
I agree. Well, thank you for doing this interview and coming here and telling us about yourself and just what BJC, now BSC, is and what it has come to, and just the history of the Mystician and everything that came along with that. It's been great having you, so thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I mean, there's all kinds of other things we could talk about too, like
Right.
classrooms and different professors and all that. And I mean, it's a lot of fun.
It is. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bye, guys. I don't know how to end that.